We've hosted 35 game jams, now it's time to mix it up a bit. Chiptune jam number 1. If you're watching this, you've likely joined this jam through itch.io. If not, the link is in the description. It'll provide some context for what we're doing here. The tracker we will be using for Chiptune jam number 1 is Famitracker. The theme for Chiptune jam number 1 is Castlevania-3 or Akumajo Densetsu in Japan. You will compose a brand new, completely original chiptune that sounds like it could have been in this game's soundtrack. Here's a quick explanation on the theme and the jam. Castlevania-3 on the Famicom actually has a different soundtrack than it does on the NES, because the NES couldn't utilize the VRC6 sound chip. Famitracker allows us to use the VRC6 to make something that sounds like it could have been in Akumajo Densetsu. For the sake of simplicity for the video, I'll refer to both versions of the game as Castlevania 3. The link for the Chiptune Jam number 1 starter kit is in the description. In there, you'll find the version of Famitracker that you must use, along with a starter file that contains preset instruments. You may add your own instruments, but I highly encourage you to start with what's there, especially if you're a beginner. Songs need to be submitted as an asset on itch, and can be anywhere between 30 seconds and 4 minutes of length. Just a reminder, this is a composition challenge as well as a chiptune tracking one, so only original music is allowed, no covers. Cherry-picking motifs from the existing OST is okay, encouraged even. The remainder of this video will be comprised of the following segments: an introduction to Famitracker, a closer look at Castlevania 3 OST, and my suggested approach to composing a tune that fits this theme. I'll finish off the video by talking briefly about my wonderful game dev community and some of the other cool stuff we've got going on over there. Worth noting, even if you're not participating in the Chiptune Jam number 1, this video will still stand on its own as an introductory Famitracker tutorial. Alright, let's start learning about Famitracker. You might feel overwhelmed if you're opening this up for the first time, which is an understandable reaction to this mess. What are all these rows? Why is everything in hex? I've never even made music before. This looks impossible. Don't worry. I'm going to break down the elements of this software for you guys in a way that is hopefully easy to understand. This is a tracker interface. If you're used to a piano roll, it's going to be confusing at first, but once it clicks, it's insanely powerful. Each vertical column here is called a channel. Each one of these can output one instrument at a time. The basic NES setup has the Pulse 1 channel, usually used for lead melodies. The Pulse 2 channel can be used for harmony, counter melodies, and echoing the lead melodies. The Triangle channel, good for bass and toms, has other potential uses, but it can't change its volume. The Noise channel, used for drums and sound effects. And the DPCM channel, exclusively for samples. For this particular chiptune jam, you'll only be allowed to use the samples that I've provided with the starter kit. It's already loaded into the file and is good to go. You'll also be using the already added VRC6 module in your project, which provides 2 additional pulse channels and a sawtooth channel, which is perfect for bass lines and lead doubling. The horizontal rows on the tracker grid each represent 1 frame of time, so when your tune is being played, Famitracker will play each row in order from top to bottom. A channel row is what we'll call each row that's within a channel. Each channel row has little columns for values that you can input that represent the following elements. On the left is the note column. This is where the musical letter note goes. C4 is a C in octave 4. The lower the octave, the lower the note will sound. In order to enter notes, you must be in edit mode or record mode, which can be toggled with the space bar or by clicking the record button at the top. If edit mode is on, your highlight row will be red, and if it's off, it'll be blue. Having it off lets you play notes on the channel you have highlighted, which is great for testing your instruments. You can input notes directly using the letters and numbers on your keyboard, all laid out like a piano. The Z to M row represents white keys on the piano, and the row directly above it represents black keys. The same scheme is used above, with Q to P representing a higher set of white piano keys, and the alpha number row representing a higher set of black piano keys. The exception here is alpha number 1, which is used for silence to cut off notes, and appears as a small horizontal line. You'll be using these a lot in your chiptune, so remember this hotkey. Next up, after the note column, is the instrument column. This number represents the instrument that's currently being used, whose hex values will need to match one of the instruments in your instrument rack, up in the top right. We've got the volume column, with 0 being silence and F being the loudest. And finally, the effects column, which you can add multiple of by clicking this little arrow up top. We'll only be going over the most important effects in this video, but if you're curious to dive deeper into it, or you just want to remember what values perform which effects, you can click on Help up top, then Effect Table to open up the built-in documentation on FX. There will be a bit more about FX later in the video. Quick note if you're confused about how hexadecimal values work, they are a base 16 value that goes from 0 to F, different from the base 10 decimal system that we use in everyday life. If you add 1 to a hexadecimal value of 0F, you get 10. If you add 16 to that value, you get 20. That wasn't a great explanation, but hopefully you get it by now. If you're feeling stuck with any of this, feel free to ask questions in the Discord or leave a comment below. I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Now, let's take a look at song settings. Over here, you can set the speed and tempo, which will change how fast your song plays, but they control different things under the hood, emulating how it works on the NES. Speed controls the number of ticks per row. At speed 1, each row is updated once per frame at 60 FPS. At speed 6, it updates to the next row every 6 frames, so it's 1/6 as fast. The default speed is 6 because that's authentic to how the NES works. Using a speed value below 6 is only possible because we don't need to run this on an NES. For this chiptune jam, unless it really hinders your ability to compose the specific song you're trying to make, I recommend leaving it at 6. Tempo controls the number of rows per second, which is what you should adjust if you want to change the BPM or beats per minute of your chiptune, make it faster or slower. If you're a more experienced user and you want finer control of each row, lower the speed setting. Want to change how fast your groove moves? Adjust the tempo. Next up on the song settings, we have the setting for number of rows and number of frames. Frames are groups of rows. Adding more of them will increase the length of your song. Take note of the frame list in the top left of the Famitracker editor. Adjusting the rows value will change how many rows there are within each frame. Each row in the frame list consists of patterns, one pattern per channel on each frame. Pattern values are unique to each channel. For example, 00 on the Pulse 1 channel is unique to 00 on the Pulse 2 channel. Anytime you change a pattern, it changes all the instances of that pattern in every frame for that specific channel. If you edit 00 in one frame of your Pulse 1 channel, and then edit 00 in a different frame on your Pulse 1 channel, you will overwrite the first one because they share the same pattern. Be careful! It is really easy to accidentally edit a pattern later on in the song, only to find out you messed up an earlier frame where that pattern was used. If you need to reuse a pattern and edit a new instance of it only a little bit, right-click the pattern in question and choose Clone Pattern. This will take a copy of all the notes in the pattern you right-clicked and assign it to the next available empty pattern value. This is seriously easy to mess up, so again, be extra careful. An absolutely unforgivable aspect of this editor design is that there is no built-in naming or labeling for patterns. The only way to remember which pattern has what notes is to reference an existing one that's already input into one of your frames. That's going to be a nightmare, so I highly recommend keeping a personal written reference of each channel's patterns as you make them, using a text editor. On the other hand, if you don't think you'll reuse patterns and just want to copy-paste big sections of notes over and over again, you can just add a bunch of frames and set the pattern on each channel in the frame list to be the exact same value as the frame itself. This will help you have basic continuity to follow that's easy to understand, so you don't have to worry too much about pattern reuse as a beginner. Because we don't have memory limitations, patterns on each channel can go all the way up to FF, so if you choose to do it this way, you will still have more room than you need. Okay, that was a lot of over-explaining and talking about the editor interface. Glad that's over. Now, we can move on to the instruments. I've prepped a set of basic instruments that are also included in the Chiptune Jam No. 1 starter kit, but I also wanted to show you how to make new instruments on your own. I'll demonstrate the instruments in the starter kit in the Castlevania segment later in the video. Instruments created are module specific, so you'll need to make VRC6 instruments for VRC6 pulse channels and sawtooth, and 2AO3 instruments for the rest of them. Thankfully, the instructions for making these instruments is the same for both of these modules, so we'll create a 2AO3 instrument by clicking this button here. Select and double-click the instrument you just created to edit it. Instruments are made up of envelopes, one for each envelope effect. Envelopes are a little sequence that runs tick by tick, simultaneously for each effect. Let's quickly go over the interface for the instrument editor. There's a list of envelope effects you can edit. To the left of it, a sequence number, and to the left of that, a checkbox that determines whether the effect is active. Like patterns, sequence numbers can be overwritten, mostly by accident, so make sure to click this button here that says select the next empty slot when making a new envelope sequence. You can set the number of ticks or size of an envelope by clicking these plus and minus buttons over here. Then, change the values in the sequence by clicking and dragging. It's kinda like drawing it. Alternatively, you can enter the values for the sequence in this text bar here. Writing the values lets you add a looping point and a release point to your envelopes. Looping points are notated with a vertical bar. Release points are notated with a /. Now that you know how the instrument editor works, let's go over the envelope effects and what they do. Volume, for attack, decay, stuttering. Arpeggio, a sequence of notes to play. These are used a lot in Chiptune, especially due to hardware limitations. You can make these go really fast for that classic Chiptune chord. Pitch. Smaller pitch bends to add depth of character to your instrument, like so. Duty. For pulse channels, this changes the timbre quite a bit. Pay attention to how the note changes shape with different duty envelopes. For the noise channel, there are two notable duty values, normal and toilet. Normal is duty 0 and 2, and toilet is duty 1 and 3. I almost never use toilet, as it sounds glitchy and disgusting, but it can add some shape to your drum noises if you just add one tick of it at the beginning. Like this. The last thing to take note of in the instrument editor is the DPCM Samples tab, which allows you to add samples that can be used in the DPCM channel. You can load in DMC files and assign them to a specific note. You don't need to worry about this for the Chiptune Jam number 1 though, because I've only allowed you to use a few of them, and they're already loaded into the starter kit file. In many of my own compositions, I've opted to use blank instruments that make more detailed use of the FX columns, so I'll very briefly tell you my most commonly used FX, but to avoid making this video even more monumental than it already is, I'll dive deeper into FX in a future video, and leave FX learning up to your own experimentation this time around. Here are my most commonly used FX. FX 0 for quick inline arpeggios. FX3 for automatic portamento, which means automatically sliding between notes. FX4 for vibrato, great for leads. FXA for volume sliding, though I typically do these by hand, it is useful. FXB to jump to a different part of the song. FXD to skip the current frame and jump to row XX of the next. FXG for note delay, if you want to be weird about it. It can be used for swinging and stuff like that. FXP for fine pitch. Default is 80. Doubling up sounds nice, but only in the upwards direction. For 2 channels playing the same note in unison, set one to 81 or 82 and the other to 80. Never go down into the 70s. It makes it flat and it sounds disgusting in unison with an on-pitch note. FXQ for sliding notes up. FXR for sliding notes down. And lastly, FXV, which lets you change the duty. I use this a lot, especially for lead melodies that I want to sound like a voice. I'll change the duty for specific notes within melodies all the time. Here's an example from a piece that I wrote. For more detailed info about all the FX in Famitracker, Click on Help at the top of the editor, then select Effect Table to open up the built-in documentation on effects. Effects are notated using a letter or number, followed by 2 hex values. XX is a 2-digit value controlling one element of the effect, and XY is 2 separate single-digit values that each control a separate element of the effect. The effect table documentation will lead the rest of the way from here. Hopefully that gives you enough information to fly free and start using the editor on your own. If I missed anything, or you have any questions, drop a comment below and I'll answer you to the best of my ability. You can join my game dev community Discord as well, to chat with the community, ask questions, and most importantly, participate in future chiptune jams and game jams that we host in this community. I'm active in there and will gladly help out whenever I can. Similarly, if you come to talk to me while I'm doing my Twitch stream, I'm always ready to help out. Link in the description. Okay, wow, we finally made it to the part where I can talk about Castlevania 3. The Castlevania 3 soundtrack is acting as the theme for our chiptune jam going on right now. We're not going to be making a full Castlevania-style song together on this video, but I'll demonstrate the instruments I made for the starter kit and give you pointers for how to approach composing a chiptune for this jam. We'll do another video after the chiptune jam number 1 has concluded, showing off what I made for the chiptune jam, as well as the other chiptunes that participants submitted. For more info on the chiptune jam, check the link in the description. As I said much earlier in the video, the Famicom soundtrack for the game has a fuller sound than the NES version, thanks to the additional VRC6 sound chip. There are other modules within Famitracker that can simulate additional sound chips. For this chiptune jam, we are only using the 2A03 and VRC6 sound chip. In future chiptune jams, we will explore what can be done with the other modules, and I'll challenge you to make tunes with them as well. Let's take a look at some Castlevania 3 music. Here's a snippet from the NES version. And here is a snippet of the same song from the Famicom version. Huge difference. The NES one is still awesome, it just had tighter limitations because of the hardware. Most of the fullness in the Famicom version comes from doubling up instruments, echoing channels, and having more freedom to add additional counter melodies and arpeggiation. The meat of the compositions are still there in the NES version, so I figured this would be an excellent theme as it provides really solid reference from both versions for building up the sounds. In this context specifically, a good way you can approach composing is by adding your melody, drums, and bass lines with just the first 5 channels. Then, add in the other 3 VRC6 channels after you've already blocked out your whole song. Adding details right off the bat is not advised. Always use broad strokes first. Just lay it down nice and easy, gamers. You got this. Now we can take a listen to the instruments I've made for the starter kit. Here are some of the instruments I've made for you guys. The triangle tom, a percussive triangle hit that drops in pitch. This can work great as a snare, or a bass drum, or doubling up on either of those. The crispy hi-hat, a noise channel with short envelopes for sharp hats. Variate the note inputs for slightly different pitches, adding more depth to the overall sound of the hi-hats. Lead with volume envelope fade-in, also has a release. Octave pluck, an instrument with alternating octaves for textured sound and a bouncy feel. Arpeggio spam. I've created a few arpeggios that can be used to shape the chordal elements of your harmony. Arpeggiation, like the one in this instrument, are a big part of what gives chiptunes their distinct sound and style. Use them generously. Semitone trill. Basically, just a loop of a note that goes up and down really fast. No FX or repetitive note entry needed. Blank instruments. No envelopes here, just meant for custom FX use and pure waves. Use FX4 for vibrato, but not right at the beginning of the note. Good leads with a nice singing sound have the vibrato kick in after the note is held for a little bit. We're now going to break down some elements from Castlevania 3 compositions. A lot of the songs that do feature drums use patterns that feel really familiar. They've got that classic heavy metal energy to them. Tight kicks, sharp snares, and a driving rhythm that locks in with the bass. Let's take a quick listen so you can hear what I mean. No Castlevania track just loops the same beat endlessly. Most of them use multiple different drum patterns that contrast with each other and change up the groove as the song progresses. And, just as importantly, there are sections with no drums at all. These moments let the instrumental counterpoint take center stage, where different melodic lines weave in and out of each other, creating moving harmonies that are exceptionally pleasant to the ear. It gives the music that classical or baroque flavor. Counterpoint in basic terms means multiple independent melodies happening at once, not just chords backing a lead. In Famitracker, you can pull this off by writing lead lines in pulse 1 and supporting responsive lines in pulse 2 that either mimic, harmonize, or contrast what the lead is doing. That technique is everywhere in Castlevania 3. It's a huge part of what gives it that gothic, intelligent, and emotionally rich sound. For Chiptune Jam number 1, the result of what you make doesn't need to be as full or complete sounding as the tracks in Castlevania 3. The composers worked very hard for a much longer amount of time than we have, and with more experience, so keep your expectations realistic, learning as you go while composing for this theme. Since the lower limit of the song length is just 30 seconds, and some tunes in Castlevania 3 don't even have drums, you can get away with just a short snippet of counterpoint and try to focus on making that sound good. Next, let's talk a little bit about reference tracks from the Castlevania 3 soundtrack, and what things to pay attention for when examining the reference tracks. Melodic counterpoint. Notice how different melody lines interact, especially in Pulse 1 and Pulse 2. They're not just harmonizing directly, but often responding to each other with call and response or imitation. Drumbeat variation. Most tracks don't just loop the same drum pattern, they switch up the rhythm depending on the section. Look out for fills, transitions, and energy shifts. Use of silence or drumless sections. Some of the most expressive moments happen when the drums drop out completely, giving space for the melody and the counterpoint to just take off. Sawtooth bass lines. The VRC6 saw channel is often used for punchy, driving bass parts. It's usually rhythmically tight and acts almost like a rhythm guitar. Arpeggios and fake chords. When there aren't enough channels for full chords, fast arpeggios are used to suggest harmony. Pay attention to how they're used to fill space. Dramatic key changes or modulations. Tracks will sometimes shift keys or modulate to build drama. This keeps things exciting and less repetitive over time. Specifically in the context of Chiptune Jam No. 1, where your time is limited and scope must be managed, here are my suggestions to approaching which track to reference to get a feel for your song, depending on the type of composer that you are. If you're an experienced chiptuner or composer, you can try for a fuller sounding song, similar to Beginning or Mad Forest. Still though, 48 hours is not a lot of time, so that's a tall order. If you know how to get a groove going, but aren't as strong with melodic composing, try to make something with a little more breathing room, similar to Demon Seed or Overture from the soundtrack. If you feel confident you can put something complete sounding together, but it may not be very long and doesn't have many different parts, you can make a short but stimulating loop, similar to Pressure from the soundtrack. If you like melodies, want to dabble in counterpoint, but can't commit to making anything too long or complex, make something similar to Prayer, Destiny, or Evergreen. If the harmonic minor, evil-sounding vibes are too anxiety-inducing or simply not in your range of composition, reference the track Flashback for something a little bit more happy-sounding. There are a number of other great tracks from the OST that I didn't mention that would be suitable reference as well. I must emphasize the importance of using a reference track though, not to copy directly at all, but it provides a helpful guide for nailing the overall sound of your track, especially in the context of the chiptune jam where you're required to adhere to the theme. Keep these ideas in mind as you study the tracks. Even just a couple of them can help inspire the entire composition for your jam entry. If you made it this far, seriously, thank you for watching. If you found this helpful at all, consider subscribing for more game development content. I've spent years working across all areas of game dev, programming, art, audio, design, and I'm just getting started here on YouTube. I also stream regularly over on Twitch and run a super awesome community on Discord where we host frequent creative events, like this chiptune jam, game jams, which we've done 35 of already, Curdle jam, weekly art prompts where we do speed modeling and art to a timer, with even more cool stuff on the horizon. It's all about learning by doing, putting your skills into practice, and doing it with a fun community of friends. I also work on my own games on stream, and my upcoming release, ACUVAC, a suck and blow adventure, is set to release this summer. Links to everything, Twitch, Discord, the jam page, the chiptune jam starter kit, my game ACUVAC on Steam, everything is in the description below. Alright, that's it. Thanks for watching, and see you soon.